What became of the woman who saw heaven before the others? When the tomb was empty and the stone rolled back by light itself, what voice called her name in the silence? And when she spoke to the risen one, her tears turning to dawn, what secret did he entrust her with, that men later buried beneath centuries of silence? There are whispers that Mary Magdalene walked beyond history into the places where faith and exile meet, that she carried not only the memory of resurrection, but the echo of a truth the world was not ready to bear. In the stillness after the miracle, when the crowds dispersed and heaven seemed to withdraw, her footsteps led toward the mountains, where wind and dust remember her prayers. The scrolls say little, the earth says more. For in every forgotten ruin, there is a shadow of her presence, a woman clothed in dawn, carrying a light that would not die. And still the heavens waited for the day her story would rise again, not from doctrine, but from remembrance. The remembrance of love that did not vanish with death, of faith that did not crumble when heaven grew silent. And in that silence, something holy stirred. If your spirit feels this remembrance, stay close. Subscribe not to a channel, but to memory itself, for perhaps this story waited all this time, just to find you. The night had not yet ended. The stars still clung to the sky like forgotten prayers, their light trembling above the quiet hills of Jerusalem. The wind carried the faint scent of myrrh and mourning, that sacred fragrance of endings. And in the hollow between grief and dawn, a lone figure walked the path that led to the tomb. Her name was Mary, but heaven had called her by another name, one that no scripture ever wrote, one that only angels remember. The sound of it once turned demons to dust. The echo of it once stirred the heart of the sea. The earth beneath her feet was still wet with the dew of sorrow. Each step whispered memory of laughter beside the well, of the teacher's eyes reflecting an unseen kingdom, of hands that healed without word or gesture. She walked not to find a body, but to hold the silence one last time, to sit beside what once held eternity. And still the heavens waited. She reached the stone. It was moved. The tomb yawned open, not in decay but in light. The air shimmered not with fire, but with remembrance. Something ancient filled the garden, as though creation itself had drawn breath again. The veil between life and death thinned to the sound of her heartbeat. "Who has taken him?" she whispered, her voice trembling like incense. The words drifted into the hollow space, unanswered, yet the silence felt alive, aware, listening. Somewhere in that silence, the first dawn of eternity waited. And then, a voice. Not thunder, not angelic, just a whisper behind her, so human it made the stars pause. Mary. She turned. The world turned with her, and in that single breath, all grief became glory, all loss became beginning. The risen light stood before her, not as a vision, but as the pulse of creation reborn. She fell to her knees, not in worship, but in recognition, for she saw in his eyes what she had always known, that love, once sanctified by sorrow, could not die. "Do not cling to me," he said softly, "for I have not yet ascended." Yet even in those words, there was a promise that ascension would not mean departure, but return in another form. And the wind carried his voice through the olive trees, as though heaven itself sighed with relief. When she rose again, the tomb behind her no longer held emptiness, it held remembrance. The dawn had come, and with it, the first secret of resurrection, that faith begins not in triumph, but in tears that refuse to forget. And still, the heavens waited. The sun climbed slow, as if afraid to touch the world too soon. Shadows stretched like memories across the stones. Mary walked through them, her hands trembling, her soul caught between the living and the divine. The voice still echoed in her, not sound, but light. Every heartbeat repeated his name. She reached the city gates as the world began to stir. The market stalls were being opened, the scent of bread rising like prayer. Men spoke of taxes, soldiers passed in silence, and no one knew that creation had just begun again. Only she carried the secret, the breath of eternity hidden beneath her cloak. She went to them, to the brothers who had walked beside him. Their faces were carved from doubt and fear. The upper room still smelled of morning. When she entered, their eyes did not rise. To them, she was the woman who wept too easily, who loved too much. They did not yet know that love was the key heaven had chosen. "I have seen him," she whispered. At first, no one spoke. A cup trembled in a hand. The air thickened with disbelief. Peter turned his gaze toward her, as if her words were blasphemy, not revelation. Yet her silence was stronger than their fear. Her tears glimmered like oil in the lamplight. "What did he say?" one asked, voice breaking. She closed her eyes. The moment returned the garden, the voice, the light behind the veil. "He called my name," and in that small confession, the room trembled. For they understood then that heaven had not chosen the mighty, nor the learned, nor the ones with swords or scrolls. Heaven had chosen the heart that would remember, and still the heavens waited. Mary stepped back into the fading light, her soul divided between joy and burden. She had seen what eyes were never meant to see, and now the world would not believe her. But faith, she realized, was not belief, it was remembrance. She walked again toward the hills, the wind catching the hem of her garment like wings. Every step she took felt written before the world began. The teacher was gone from her sight, but not from her breath. His words burned within her, quiet as dawn fire. "Tell them I am returning not as a king, but as the light within their hearts." And in that whisper, she understood the first truth of the new world. That resurrection was not a single event, but the slow awakening of all creation. And still, the heavens waited. The day passed, and night returned not the same night as before, but one softer, bearing a strange peace. The stars no longer looked distant, they shimmered like witnesses, patient and knowing. Mary sat alone upon a hillside outside the city, her hands clasped around the memory of his voice. The olive branches above her stirred, murmuring in a language only angels remember. How long had she been chosen to see? How many lifetimes had led her to that garden where eternity unfolded in a breath? She wondered if Adam's dust had wept in joy that morning, if the stones themselves had remembered the first time light touched them. The whole world seemed to hum with unseen music, as if creation itself was exhaling. And still, the heavens waited. She thought of the others, of Peter, whose strength was bound by guilt, of Thomas, whose heart had become a fortress of questions, of John, who loved deeply but feared the world's cruelty. Each carried their own silence, their own cross of remembrance. Yet she carried something different, not command, not duty, but revelation. She had looked into the eyes of the living one and seen not triumph, but tenderness. Her heart trembled with it. The world would not believe such gentleness. Men desired miracles written in fire, not in tears. They would build temples, carve doctrines, and argue over his throne while she remembered his silence, the way the divine had leaned close enough to whisper her name. The wind grew colder. The moon traced silver across her hair. She could still hear his words beneath the rustle of leaves. "Tell them I am with them, though unseen. Tell them that love does not die, it transforms." She looked to the horizon, where light and shadow embraced. Was this the place heaven touched earth? Was resurrection a beginning, or the soft unending of all things? The air thickened with something sacred. Her tears fell again, not of grief this time, but of awe, for she felt the same presence beside her. The same warmth that once turned tombs into gardens, and in that silence, something holy stirred. The earth breathed with her, the stars brightened, and though no one saw her kneeling there in the dust, all of heaven was listening. And still, the heavens waited. The wind rose from the east, soft, sacred, remembering. It carried the scent of cedar and distant rain, and as it moved through the valley, it seemed to awaken something buried beneath centuries of stillness. Mary lifted her gaze to the horizon, where night and dawn wove together like two eternal hands. The sky was pale gold, the color of rebirth. In that light, she remembered the garden, the tomb, the voice that spoke her name. Yet memory, she knew, was not enough. What she had seen was not meant to be kept. It was a seed meant for hearts unready to receive it. She thought of his final words, not to the multitudes, but to her alone. Go and tell them what you have seen. And still, the heavens waited. She returned once more to the city. The walls loomed grey, the streets heavy with the dust of disbelief. Rumors swirled like restless wind that his body had been stolen, that his followers plotted rebellion. Yet through all the noise, she carried a silence no one could steal, a silence shaped like light. At the threshold of the house, she paused. The door was half open, the murmurs of argument spilling out. The disciples' voices trembled between hope and denial. Some wept, some doubted. Some spoke of returning to Galilee, to the safety of their nets and old names. She stepped inside. The room dimmed, as though even the shadows turned to listen. Her eyes were bright, with something beyond grief. She did not raise her voice. She only spoke as one who had seen the dawn, while others still dreamed. He lives, she said, not as before, not in the way flesh lives, but in the way breath moves through the soul. Her words fell like water on parched ground. Some bowed their heads, others turned away. The fire in the corner crackled a single spark, leapt, then faded. Faith is not always born of proof, she thought. Sometimes it begins in the quiet ache of longing. Sometimes it is the whisper that refuses to die. And so she waited with them, not as one forgotten, but as one who remembered before. Remembering was possible. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, not of storm, but of promise. The world was stirring again. The earth, still heavy from the tomb's silence, was learning how to breathe anew. And in that stillness, something holy stirred. The days passed like pages turning in the wind, uncounted, unmeasured. Jerusalem moved on, but the air still trembled with something unseen. The soldiers returned to their posts, the merchants to their scales, the priests to their rituals. But somewhere beneath the rhythm of ordinary life, the earth whispered of resurrection. Mary had become a shadow among the living, not forgotten, but hidden by heaven's design. She stayed near the olive groves where the teacher had once prayed, her hands tracing the bark of old trees, as if reading ancient scripture written in wood and wind. Each night she lit a small lamp and spoke softly into the silence, as though the silence itself was listening. Why me, she would ask. Why did the light reveal itself to one the world would not believe? The stars never answered, yet they blinked as though they knew. Perhaps heaven had chosen her because she did not seek glory, only understanding. And still, the heavens waited. Sometimes she saw them, the men who had walked with him. Their faces changed, their voices carried new weight. Peter preached in secret. John wrote by lamplight. Thomas wandered, asking questions that only faith could answer, but none spoke her name. None sought her counsel. She was the first to see, yet the last to be heard. Still, she kept the remembrance. When she closed her eyes, she could still see the garden, the torn veil of night, the light that had no source. She could still feel his gaze, not as ruler, but as one who loved. And in that love, she found her strength. She began to walk again, far beyond the city's edge, to the hills, to the desert paths, to the places where prophets once wept. The wilderness seemed to recognize her, the stones warm beneath her feet, the air rich with unspoken memory. Once, at dusk, she stopped beside a spring. Its waters were clear, reflecting the fading sky. She leaned close, and for a moment saw not her reflection, but another's, the same eyes, the same gentleness, the same promise. Her breath caught, and she whispered, "Are you still with me?" The wind answered in silence, yet that silence was full, like the breath before creation, and in that stillness something holy stirred. The light touched her face, not from the sun, but from within, for she carried what no tomb could keep, the remembrance of divine love unending. And still the heavens waited. The morning after the stone was rolled away, the garden still breathed of eternity. The air trembled with dew that remembered the footsteps of angels. Every leaf seemed to shimmer with an unseen fire, not of destruction, but of awakening. The world, newly born, exhaled through the fragrance of myrrh and lilies. And there, in the hush between heaven and soil, the garden remembered his name. It had heard it once before, long before man drew breath. It was the name by which stars were summoned and seas divided. The sound of it moved through roots and rivers, through the wings of doves and the dust beneath her feet. The garden did not forget, only mankind did. Mary stood where morning met eternity. The sun rose, slow and sacred, gilding the stone with light. She pressed her palms to the earth, and it felt warm, alive, as though it knew the truth she carried. The teacher had not left. He had only changed form. Now, every breath of wind, every glimmer of dawn, every rustle of leaf bore his remembrance. And still the heavens waited. She lingered in that place long after others left, unable to sever herself from its holiness. Sometimes she thought she heard footsteps in the leaves or the soft murmur of unseen wings. Once she turned and saw a shadow near the trees, not of man, but of something clothed in light, too gentle to look upon. It was gone as quickly as it came, but the stillness that followed spoke louder than thunder. She knelt again, whispering the name she dared not speak aloud, the name that once raised the dead and calmed the sea. It echoed through her like a heartbeat. Her tears fell to the soil, and the soil glimmered, as though remembering the hands that once blessed it. And in that silence, something holy stirred. The garden had grown wilder now. Weeks had passed since that morning, yet the air still carried the shimmer of first light. The fig trees had thickened, their leaves whispering of secrets that refused to die. Even the sparrows seemed unafraid, as if they too had heard the whisper of eternity and found peace within it. Mary returned often, drawn not by duty but by longing. The world beyond these gates had already begun to forget. The market spoke again of trade, the priests of law, the streets of rumors. But here, inside these sacred walls of green, the truth still lived, not written, but remembered. The stones hummed softly beneath her sandals, a low vibration like breath through the heart of the earth. She would sit by the entrance of the tomb and speak as one does to a beloved who is absent yet near. "You said not to cling," she murmured. "But how can the heart obey when it has tasted eternity?" The breeze answered, brushing her face with the tenderness of hands unseen. She smiled through her tears, knowing the answer was not in words, but in the stillness between them. And still, the heavens waited. There were nights she stayed until the stars returned, the same stars that had watched the stone roll away. They blinked softly, as though bearing witness to her faith. Once, she thought she saw him again, not in flesh, but in reflection, as moonlight shaped itself into a human form beside the tomb. It stood silent, radiant, watching. She did not move. She only bowed her head, whispering, "If you are here, then all the world is holy." The figure faded into light. The garden sighed, and for the first time she felt no separation, no distance between earth and heaven. The teacher had not gone. He had become the silence itself. That night, as she left, she placed her hand upon the stone where his body once lay. Beneath her touch, the cold marble pulsed faintly like a slumbering heart. It was then she understood the resurrection was not only his, but the beginning of life reborn in all who would remember. And in that silence, something holy stirred. The next morning the light came differently, softer, slower, as if reluctant to wake the world. Mist clung to the roots of the olive trees, wrapping them in veils of memory. The garden breathed in silence, every leaf trembling beneath an invisible hand. Mary entered quietly, her steps careful, her heart steady, with a kind of reverence that words could not hold. She no longer came in grief, she came to listen, for the garden had begun to speak in ways the city never could. When the wind passed through the reeds, she heard echoes of his laughter. When the sun touched the lilies, she saw the warmth of his smile. Creation itself had become the gospel, the world alive with his remembrance. And still the heavens waited. She knelt by the stone where his absence glowed brighter than his presence once did. A bird sang above her, its voice delicate as a prayer. She looked upward and whispered, "Is this how heaven sounds when it forgives?" The question lingered, folding into the air like smoke from sacred fire. She thought of all he had said, the parables that were not riddles but mirrors, truths, meant to be seen in the heart, not debated in the mind. And she knew then that the resurrection was not only an event, but a rhythm, fall, silence, rising. As the seed breaks to bloom, as the night breaks to dawn, so too must sorrow break to light. Her tears fell again, but they were not of pain. They were the rain of understanding. They touched the soil, and in their place small flowers began to open, pale, trembling, fragrant. The earth itself had listened to her prayer. Mary closed her eyes. The garden was breathing through her, and she through it. No longer two worlds, heaven and earth, but one eternal breath. The teacher was everywhere now, in wind, in light, in memory. She smiled faintly, whispering, "The tomb was never his prison, it was his doorway." And in that silence, something holy stirred. The garden slept beneath a veil of twilight. The air was heavy with the fragrance of fig and myrrh, and the last rays of the sun slipped through the branches like threads of gold, weaving a tapestry across the stones. Mary returned once more, not as a mourner, but as a keeper of remembrance. The silence greeted her. It was no longer empty. It breathed, it listened, it lived. Every petal and every gust of wind seemed to bow toward her presence, as though heaven itself had placed its ear upon the soil to hear what she might say. She knelt, tracing her fingers through the dust that once bore his footprints. "You said the seed must fall," she whispered. "But what becomes of the ground that receives it?" Her words trembled in the air, like prayer caught between two worlds. The leaves shivered, and from somewhere unseen came the faint hum of the unseen, the soft flutter of angelic wings, the distant song of light remembering itself. And still the heavens waited. Then she felt it again, that quiet warmth at her back. Not a presence she could see, but one she could not deny. The garden glowed faintly, and the shadows stretched toward her, as if reaching for the voice that once called her name. The tomb was no longer a grave. It was a gate between breaths. The whole earth was trembling with resurrection, still unfolding, still unfinished. She bowed her head. The wind brushed past her ear, and in its passing came a whisper, softer than thought. "Do not search for me in the tombs of yesterday. I walk in every breath of the living." Tears rose, slow and luminous. They fell upon the earth and shimmered like stars upon the dust. The garden heard and answered with silence the kind that heals. Mary stood at last. The sun had set, but the air still glowed. She looked once more toward the tomb and said, barely audible, "Then the world itself is your body, and love, your unending resurrection." And in that silence, something holy stirred. The garden sighed, and the stars awakened one by one. And still the heavens waited. The streets of Jerusalem had changed. The air no longer trembled with the fear of crucifixion, but with a quieter unrest, the kind that comes when truth has entered the world and no one yet knows what to do with it. The city moved as though half awake, its stones still echoing with footsteps from the tomb to the throne of heaven. Behind shuttered doors, the disciples gathered. The room smelled of oil lamps and old wine, of unspoken prayers. They sat in circles of silence, their eyes lowered, their faith fragile as smoke. The resurrection had come like lightning, brilliant, undeniable, yet gone too quickly to grasp. What were they to do with a miracle too vast for language? Mary entered quietly. Her presence was soft, yet it carried the stillness of the garden, that same light that had once moved through her when the tomb opened. She did not speak at first. She only looked at them, one by one, as though searching for the courage that once followed him through storms. Peter avoided her gaze. Thomas studied his hands. John wept without sound. They had seen wonders, yet they were not ready to remember. "Why do you fear what you've already witnessed?" she asked gently. Her voice was not a challenge, it was mercy, but no one answered. The silence grew thicker, a wall between revelation and acceptance. And still, the heavens waited. She walked to the table where bread lay broken and untouched. Her hand hovered above it. "He said to remember him in this," she whispered. "But remembrance is not in bread or wine. It is in love that does not end when the body does." Thomas lifted his head. "And yet the world demands proof." Mary smiled sadly. "Then the world will never see." Her words fell like dew on dry stone. Even doubt seemed to soften in their wake. The silence of the apostles was no longer void. It had become the womb of something sacred, the place where faith was learning to breathe again. And in that stillness, something holy stirred. The room was dim, its only light a single flame flickering in a clay lamp. It bent and swayed with each breath they took, as if the spirit itself lingered there, waiting to be named. Peter's hand trembled upon the table. His voice broke the silence first. "Why you?" he asked. Not cruelly, but with the ache of a man undone. "Why would the Master reveal himself to you first and not to us, his chosen?" Mary looked up. Her eyes reflected the lamp's trembling light. "There are no chosen," she said softly, "only remembered." The words fell into the air like ash from sacred fire. John drew in a breath, his tears glistening. He could still hear the echo of the teacher's laughter, the way his eyes had rested upon her with peace, not possession. And in that remembrance, something within him loosened a knot of pride, quietly undone. Thomas leaned forward. "Then what did he tell you, Mary? What truth did he leave for you alone?" She hesitated. Her fingers brushed the grain of the table, feeling the years written in its wood. "He said the kingdom was not to come, but already here within the breath, within the heart that remembers him." The flame shuddered, as though stirred by an unseen wind. For a moment, no one moved. The words were too simple to be understood, too vast to be owned. And still, the heavens waited. The silence deepened until it felt alive, breathing through them, filling the spaces between their doubts. John closed his eyes and whispered, "Then he is not gone. He has become what we are." Mary smiled faintly. "No, he has become what we were always meant to be." Outside, a low wind passed through the alleys, carrying the faint sound of distant bells, like the memory of creation still echoing from the tomb. The apostles sat without speaking. For the first time since the cross, the room no longer felt like a prison of grief. It felt like waiting for something unseen, for a promise yet to rise. And in that silence, something holy stirred. The hours passed, the lamp burned lower, its wick sighing as though weary of holding so much light. The disciples had fallen silent again, not from fear this time, but from the weight of understanding. Words had become too fragile for the revelation that lingered among them. It was no longer the silence of loss. It was the silence before creation begins anew. Mary sat apart, near the doorway. The cool night air drifted in, carrying the scent of cedar and smoke from the city below. She watched the sky, that endless parchment upon which heaven had once written the word made flesh. Now it shimmered with stars that pulsed like hidden angels, their rhythm echoing the heart of eternity. And still, the heavens waited. Inside, Peter rose at last. He walked toward her, hesitating in the lamplight. "You were there first," he said quietly. "You saw what we could not. You believed when we did not. Forgive us." Mary turned her face toward him, and her expression was not triumph, but sorrow mingled with grace. "There is nothing to forgive," she said. "Faith is not a race of witness. It is the breath of remembrance. You will remember when it is your time." Her words carried the stillness of the garden. Peter bowed his head, and the weight of guilt that had shadowed him since the courtyard began to lift, like dust rising at dawn. Thomas approached next, his eyes searching hers for proof that his reason could not grant him. "I place my hands upon his wounds," he whispered, "yet I still feel unbelief in me. What is wrong with me?" Mary reached out, her palm resting over his heart. "It is not your hands that must believe, Thomas," she murmured. It is the wound within you." He closed his eyes, and for a breath he saw again the face of the teacher, not crowned in glory, but radiant in mercy. He wept. The silence thickened, sacred, living, holy. No one moved, no one spoke. The Spirit had entered the room, unseen yet everywhere, weaving through their thoughts, kindling every heart with a small spark of the same fire that had rolled the stone away. Mary felt it move through her as it had in the garden, gentle, vast, uncontainable. The air shimmered, and she whispered, "He is here." And in that silence, something holy stirred. The flame of the lamp rose higher, steady now, unshaken by the wind. The night was full of presence, and still the heavens waited. The night grew deep, yet none among them slept. Outside, the city murmured its endless noise, carts rolling over stone, children crying, guards calling to one another, but within that small upper room, another kind of sound began to rise. It was the quiet hum of remembrance, the sound of faith being reborn. Mary closed her eyes and listened. It was faint at first, like the breath of a sleeping child, then stronger, pulsing like the tide against the shore. It filled the space between their hearts, the same rhythm she had heard in the garden when light first broke the tomb. She felt tears again, not of sorrow, but of recognition. For this was what he meant when he said, "I will be with you always." Not as presence alone, but as pulse, as spirit, as song. And still, the heavens waited. John rose to his feet, his voice trembling with awe. "I can hear him," he whispered. Not as before, not in flesh, but in breath, in silence. Peter's eyes widened, his fear melting into wonder. Even Thomas felt it, though he spoke no word. The wind that entered through the open window carried no chill, only warmth, the kind that healed. Mary stood among them, her face illuminated by the golden glow of the lamp. "You see," she said softly, "the resurrection was never meant to end in sight. It was meant to begin in spirit, to move through us, to teach us that heaven does not descend from above, but awakens from within." The words sank into their hearts like rain upon a thirsty field. One by one, they began to pray, not in the old way of asking and pleading, but in stillness, listening for the echo of the divine name inside their own breathing. And for a moment, the room disappeared. There was no stone, no wall, no night, only light, folding upon itself as if creation were beginning again. When the silence returned, it was vast and peaceful. No fear remained, only love, steady, eternal, weightless. Mary looked at each of them, her brothers, her witnesses, her burden-made family, and she whispered, "Now you understand. The tomb was not the end of his story, it was the beginning of ours." And in that silence, something holy stirred. The lamp burned steady, unblinking, and outside the window the first dove of morning passed across the stars. And still the heavens waited. The dawn came pale and trembling, the color of breath after weeping. Galilee slept beneath a hush of mist, that sacred stillness before the wind remembers its name. The lake shimmered like polished silver, unbroken, untouched, and on its surface the reflection of heaven itself seemed to wait for her. Mary walked the road alone. The stones beneath her sandals still held the memory of his feet. Each step she took was both remembrance and release, for she had been sent not to remain among the echoes, but to carry the living silence beyond the walls of men. The path was narrow, winding through hills that had once heard his parables, through fig groves that still leaned toward the sound of his voice. Birds rose as she passed, as if stirred by the faint rhythm of eternity that followed her like a shadow. She walked without fear, guided not by sight, but by that unseen pulse, the same heartbeat that had rolled away the stone. And still the heavens waited. By the second day, the wilderness opened before her. The sky grew vast, an ocean of light in which no word could hide. The air tasted of salt and wild honey. She felt the loneliness of prophets, those who had seen what others could not, and so were left to wander with their knowing. At night, she built a small fire from driftwood. The flames cracked softly, painting the sand in shades of gold and shadow. She spoke aloud to the stars, not as one praying for answers, but as one conversing with old companions. "Where do you lead me?" she asked. "Why do I still hear your footsteps in the wind?" The fire answered with a whisper that was not sound. "Because I walk where you walk. You are not alone." She bowed her head. The warmth of the fire touched her face, and for an instant she saw him beside her, not as before, but clothed in radiance, softer than dawn. His eyes held no distance, no boundary, only light remembering itself through her. When the vision faded, her heart did not ache. It burned steady, eternal, like the lamp in the apostles' room. She understood then that the path before her was not escape, but continuation, the unbroken breath of love that would not end. The teacher had risen, yes, but now he was walking the world through her steps. The stars dimmed as dawn returned. She rose, gathering her cloak around her shoulders, and began to move once more through the wilderness, toward lands unspoken, where truth could take root in silence. And in that silence, something holy stirred. The road stretched endlessly ahead, and still the heavens waited. The road curved west, where the mountains bowed to the sea. The horizon shimmered like a veil of light, and in its glow, the air sang of beginnings. Mary walked in silence, the dust of ancient roads rising like incense behind her. Every stone seemed to know her name. Every gust of wind whispered fragments of the word. She was no longer the woman the world once scorned. She was a vessel now of remembrance, of unbroken love, of the mystery that had made night and morning one. Her feet ached, yet her heart felt weightless. For she understood what the others could not yet speak aloud, that resurrection was not a moment to witness, but a life to become. At dusk, she reached the hills above Galilee. The lake below lay still as glass, reflecting the blush of heaven upon its surface. She saw there the faces of the men she once walked beside, casting their nets, laughing under the sun, unaware that they were walking the edge of eternity. The memory pierced her not with sorrow, but with gratitude, and still the heavens waited. She knelt in the tall grass, her hands pressed to the earth. The scent of salt filled her lungs, and for a heartbeat she felt the presence again, closer now, surrounding her, not in sight, not in sound, but in being. The wind stirred, and she heard his voice within her own breath. "The kingdom is not far, Mary. It is here wherever love endures." Tears welled, yet she smiled. She gathered the folds of her cloak and stood, turning toward the horizon where land and sea kissed like lovers long separated. The path before her was narrow, yet bright, not with sunlight, but with purpose. She knew she would not return. The night came alive with stars, and among them one shone brighter than the rest, a solitary flame that seemed to follow her, step for step, as she disappeared into the wilderness where heaven and exile meet. And in that silence, something holy stirred. The sea whispered her name to the wind. The earth remembered her footsteps as prayer, and still the heavens waited. The days turned to a rhythm of wandering morning light upon her face. Night wrapped around her like a cloak. She no longer counted time. The world had become a single breath, drawn in by the sea and exhaled by the mountains. Each sunrise felt like the continuation of the first, the one that broke through the tomb. Villages appeared along the path, quiet places of fishermen and shepherds. When she entered, they looked upon her with curiosity, not knowing her name, yet sensing something unearthly in the calm that followed her footsteps. She spoke little, yet wherever she stayed, hearts grew still. Children listened without knowing why, and the old whispered prayers they had long forgotten. Some called her the woman of the light, others the keeper of silence, and still the heavens waited. One evening she came to a well on the edge of a forgotten town. Its waters glimmered with moonlight, and the sound of it echoed faintly through the hollow hills. She drew a cup and drank. The taste was familiar, cool, ancient, as though drawn from Eden itself. And in the water's reflection she saw not her face, but his. The same eyes, the same peace, looking back at her from eternity. Her voice trembled. Is this where you lead me, to the places where the world has ceased to speak your name? The wind shifted, carrying the fragrance of myrrh and cedar, and within it came the same whisper that had followed her since the tomb. To remember is to resurrect. She bowed her head. The truth was simple, and yet it bore the weight of heaven. Every act of love was resurrection. Every tear forgiven, every kindness kept, was another stone rolled away. The night deepened, and the stars gathered close, not distant watchers now, but companions. Their light traced her path, as if the sky itself had become a scroll unfolding beneath her feet. She continued walking until the first blush of dawn. The sea appeared again, vast and silver blue, and the air hummed with unseen wings. She stopped there, letting the tide touch her sandals, feeling the pulse of creation beneath her. And in that silence, something holy stirred. She whispered, "If this is exile, then let exile be holy." Her words vanished into the waves, but the waves remembered, and still the heavens waited. The wind grew gentler as she walked, as though the world itself was careful not to disturb her prayer. Ahead, the sea stretched into forever silver, endless, alive with whispers. The tide crept close to her feet, soft as breath upon her skin. She felt it, the pulse of something vast, moving through the deep, the same rhythm she had heard in his voice, the heartbeat of creation itself. She sat upon a stone by the shore, her cloak wrapped around her, the horizon glowing faintly gold. Fishermen's lanterns flickered far away like stars adrift upon the waters. The air smelled of salt and memory, and still the heavens waited. She closed her eyes and listened to the murmuring of waves, to the sigh of the wind through the reeds. In that soft, unending sound, she heard again his words from the garden, "Do not cling to me." But now she understood. He had not spoken of separation, he had spoken of transformation. The divine could no longer be held in flesh, for it had spilled into all things: wind, water, soul. She breathed slowly, and with each breath the boundary between herself and the world began to fade. She was not apart from the sea, she was within it. She was not under the sky, she was of it. And in her stillness she felt the truth unfold like dawn, that resurrection was not escape from earth, but the sanctification of it. The waves reached farther, washing the sand clean where her footprints once were. She watched as they vanished, her journey, her sorrow, her very self dissolving into the great remembering. The stars brightened above her. They did not shine upon her, they shone through her. And in that light, she whispered the prayer she had carried since that morning in the garden. May every heart that suffers remember the tomb is not the end, it is the beginning of light. And in that silence, something holy stirred. The sea grew still, the wind ceased, and it seemed, for one sacred breath, that heaven had opened its eyes and was looking back at her. And still, the heavens waited. There are places the world forgets, places where the air itself carries the hush of the divine. Mary reached such a place on the 7th day of her wandering, a cleft in the mountain, narrow and hidden, veiled by hanging vines and the steady murmur of unseen water. The path that led to it was steep, but her steps did not falter. The dust of exile had become her crown. She entered without fear, as one who knows that silence is older than darkness. Inside, the cave breathed. Its walls shimmered faintly with a silver glow, not of torchlight, but of something living within the stone, a remnant, perhaps, of the first light that once clothed the world. Each drop of water that fell from the roof echoed like a psalm in the deep. The air was cool, filled with the scent of damp earth and forgotten time. And still the heavens waited. She knelt at the cave's center, where the light gathered strongest. It did not blind, it embraced. When she placed her hands upon the ground, it pulsed a slow, steady rhythm, the same heartbeat that she had followed since the tomb. For the first time, she understood that she had not been walking away from him, but deeper into his presence, into the stillness where God hides himself to be found by those who love. Her voice broke the silence, barely a whisper. "If you are here, make me your echo." And the light moved. It rose from the earth like breath, soft and golden, weaving around her form. In its warmth, she saw visions not of kingdoms or crowns, but of faces. The faces of the poor, the weary, the lost, each glowing faintly with the same light that now filled her. And she heard the voice again, as gentle as before, the same that had once spoken her name at dawn. "Mary, what was begun in the garden must now be born in the wilderness. The word must walk through silence, and the light must rest within the forgotten." Her tears fell freely, not of sorrow, but of awe, for she saw that the teacher had not left her a message to carry, but a light to become. The cave grew brighter. Its walls shone like the inside of a pearl, and the air trembled with a peace so vast that even the stones seemed to pray. She bowed her head and whispered, "Then let me remain here until I am nothing but remembrance." And in that silence, something holy stirred. The mountain above her groaned softly, and the first stars of evening appeared beyond the cave's mouth, each one a small reflection of the radiance now burning within her. And still the heavens waited. For many days, the mountain became her dwelling. No sound of men, no rumor of city reached that height. Only the breath of wind through the stone, the whisper of unseen wings in the dark. The sun entered each morning as a golden finger upon the rock, and at night the stars poured their silver through the cracks above her. The silence grew deeper, almost tangible. In that silence she found a strange companionship, as if the very heart of the world had drawn near to listen. She would speak softly, not to ask, but to remember. The parables, the laughter, the tears, the final breath upon the cross. Each word she recalled became light upon the wall, each memory a small resurrection. And still the heavens waited. Sometimes, when the air grew still enough, she would see the shimmer. It was not vision, nor dream, more like the light of heaven bending to meet her. Within it stood forms she could not name, shapes of beings radiant yet sorrowful, as if even the angels longed for what only mortals could know, to love through suffering. They said nothing, but their presence taught her that faith was not assent, but surrender, that the highest light does not blind, but humbles, and that every soul that remembers love becomes a fragment of the eternal. She began to write upon the cave's wall, not with ink, but with her hand pressed into the dust, tracing the sacred phrases that rose from her heart like prayer. The light was never lost. It only changed form. The wind answered through the hollow stone, carrying her words out into the valley below. Perhaps no ear would hear them, yet heaven would. The light within the cave pulsed once more, slow, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. And she knew then that she would not leave this mountain as she had come. The woman who once sought the risen one had become the silence that revealed him, and in that silence, something holy stirred. The night deepened, the stars leaned closer, and somewhere beyond sight, heaven opened its hands, and still the heavens waited. The mountain slept beneath a veil of mist. Each dawn arrived softly, painting the stone in colors the world had forgotten: pale gold, quiet rose, the hue of first creation. Mary woke to the sound of her own breath mingling with the wind, and it seemed to her that even the air had learned to pray. Days folded into one another like pages of a scroll unrolling in the hands of eternity. She no longer marked them by the sun or moon. Time, in that sacred hollow, had become circular, endless, echoing, still. She ate little, drank from the small stream that traced the edge of the cave, and lived as one between two worlds, not of earth, not yet of heaven. Sometimes, in the deep hours before dawn, she would feel the mountain tremble, not from storm, but from remembrance. The very stones seemed to stir with the memory of divine footsteps, as though creation itself was awakening from a long sleep. And still, the heavens waited. On one such night, the light came again, not from above, but from within. It rose behind her eyes, filled her chest, spread through her arms until her whole being glowed with the color of dawn. She could not move. She could only listen. And the voice that had once called her name in the garden spoke again, not as command, but as remembrance. You have carried my light through sorrow, now carry it through silence. When words fail, the soul will still speak. Her tears fell, shimmering like glass upon the stone. She pressed her palm against the cave wall, and beneath her touch, the rock itself seemed to pulse with the rhythm of her heart. The border between flesh and earth dissolved. She felt herself becoming part of the mountain, a living psalm carved into its eternal body. The world below had forgotten her name, but heaven had inscribed it into light. And in that moment, she understood that remembrance itself was worship, that the greatest faith was not to proclaim, but to remain. She whispered into the glowing air, "Then let this cave remember me when I am gone, and may its stones carry the echo of your name." And in that silence, something holy stirred. The stream beside her glimmered. Its ripples caught the light and carried it outward, down the mountain, into the valleys, into the hearts of those who still dreamed of grace, and still the heavens waited. The dawn crept slowly across the mouth of the cave, and the light that entered seemed older than the sun itself. It fell upon Mary like a benediction, soft, weightless, yet filled with infinite remembrance. She did not rise to greet it. She simply sat in stillness, hands upon her knees, her face bathed in the gold of awakening. Days and nights had lost their boundary. The mountain had become her sanctuary, and the silence her companion. But this morning felt different. The air was alive with expectancy, as if creation was about to inhale. She closed her eyes. The light behind them deepened, turning from gold to white, from white to something beyond color. It was not outside her, nor within her, but through her, a single current of being that wove heaven and earth into one unbroken thread. And then she heard it again, the voice that had called her from despair, the same that had spoken her name beside the tomb. "Mary," it said, and in that one word was the fullness of love. Not love as longing, nor love as memory, but love as existence itself. She bowed her head and whispered, "I am here." The light answered with silence, but that silence was alive, a silence that knew her, carried her, a silence that breathed. And still, the heavens waited. In the glow that surrounded her, she saw visions that were not hers alone. Rivers of light flowing through the souls of humankind, temples of living hearts. A new world born not of empire, but of mercy. And above it all, the sound of the same breath that had once moved across the waters in the beginning. Her tears fell freely, each one a reflection of the cosmos, small, luminous, eternal. She spoke softly, "Let my soul become your remembering, so that when the world forgets again, love will still speak." Then the light began to fade, not as death fades, but as dawn yields to day, leaving behind the warmth of what it revealed. Mary opened her eyes. The cave was still, but the glow lingered upon her skin, and her shadow, cast upon the wall, shone faintly, as though filled from within. She smiled not with joy, but with peace. The revelation was complete, yet her journey was not ended. For the light she had received was not hers to keep, but to carry quietly into the forgotten corners of the earth. And in that silence, something holy stirred. The wind entered the cave, gentle and bright. It lifted her hair, and for an instant it seemed to whisper the Amen of heaven. And still, the heavens waited. When she descended from the mountain, the world felt both new and ancient. The air shimmered with the same hush that filled the cave, and every gust of wind seemed to carry a fragment of what she had seen, that living light which once clothed creation before the first dawn. The valley below spread wide before her, a tapestry of olive groves, rivers, and ruins. Yet nothing appeared ordinary. Every branch seemed to speak in silence, every stone breathed softly, and the ground beneath her feet thrummed with the quiet rhythm of divine memory. The teacher had once said, "The kingdom is within you." Now she understood not as a lesson, but as truth felt in the bones, and still the heavens waited. She carried no scroll, no parchment, no ink. The words entrusted to her could not be bound in skin or paper. They were living a scripture of breath and silence, written not by hand, but by the soul that remembers. In her chest, she felt them unfold like wings, each memory, each act of mercy, each whispered prayer, a verse of the gospel heaven had hidden within her. As she walked, she began to speak softly to the wind, not to record, but to remember. There is no distance between the divine and the dust. What breathes in you is what spoke the stars. The tomb was only the beginning of light, learning to wear flesh again. The words fell upon the earth and vanished, but she knew the soil would keep them, for creation itself was the first scroll, and every living heart, another line in its endless scripture. At night, she slept beneath a fig tree, and in her dreams she saw faces countless, radiant, sorrowful. They were not yet born, yet each carried a spark of the same light. She heard their prayers rising through the centuries like incense, and she understood. The gospel she bore was not for her time alone, but for all who would wake in darkness and still remember love. The stars above flickered as if stirred by her breath. She placed a hand upon her heart and whispered, "Then let me become the parchment, and may your word be written in my stillness." And in that silence, something holy stirred. The wind moved through the valley, and somewhere, unseen, a seed broke open in the earth. And still the heavens waited. The road wound through the valley like a line of thought that heaven had begun and left unfinished. Mary walked its curves in silence, her cloak trailing dust that shimmered faintly in the morning light. The river beside her whispered softly over stones, and each ripple sounded like syllables of a forgotten prayer. She carried no possessions now, only the rhythm of her breath and the fire that lived behind her ribs. It was strange, this weightless gospel, this word that could not be spoken yet would not stay silent. It pulsed in her like music, rising and falling with her heartbeat. Sometimes she would stop to listen, and within that stillness she could almost hear the pages turning not of books, but of hearts awakening somewhere far away. And still the heavens waited. At midday she came to a small village, nestled among olive trees. The people were weary, their faces marked by the years of empire and hunger. They watched her approach with caution, for she carried no offering, no title, no name. Yet when she spoke, her voice felt like rain after drought. Children crept near, drawn by something they could not name. She sat among them and told no miracles, offered no prophecy. She simply spoke of remembering. "The world forgets what it cannot hold," she said. "But love was never meant to be held. It moves, it breathes, it returns as the tide to the sea, as the soul to its maker." Her words were few, but they stayed. The women repeated them softly that night while grinding their grain. A man, long burdened by grief, found himself weeping for the first time in years, and a child whispered her name into the wind, not as legend, but as prayer. When dawn came again, she was gone. Yet the air of the village seemed lighter, and the olive branches bent lower, heavy with fruit. For the word she carried had taken root there, unseen, unspoken, alive. And still the heavens waited. Mary walked on, her heart burning softly within her, a living scroll unrolling through time. Every step was scripture, every breath another verse. And in that silence, something holy stirred. The wind rose behind her, carrying her words into the hills, and the earth, remembering, whispered them back in echo. And still the heavens waited. The hills gave way to plains of wild grass. Each blade shimmered like glass in the sunlight, bending in slow waves, as if the earth itself was breathing beneath her feet. Mary moved through it like a shadow of light, her steps soundless, her heart steady, the invisible gospel burning in her chest like a lamp hidden beneath woven cloth. By now, she had stopped searching for destination. The journey itself had become her devotion. Each horizon was a new verse, each sunrise a revelation. When she looked at the sky, she no longer saw distance, only depth, only mercy. And still, the heavens waited. On the third night of her wandering, she found shelter among the ruins of an old temple, its pillars broken, its altar worn by centuries of wind. She sat upon the stone, tracing her fingers through the dust that covered its carvings. Symbols of wings and circles, once radiant, now half erased. It was the same everywhere. Men built temples, then forgot what they were for. Yet beneath the decay she could feel it, the hum of presence, the echo of prayers once spoken with trembling hearts. She closed her eyes. The air grew still. The light of the moon pooled upon the altar like water, and in it she saw shapes, hands lifting, tears falling, 1,000 souls searching for the same peace she had found. Her lips parted. "Lord," she whispered, "they will forget again. They always forget." And from within that silence came the answer, not in sound, but in the stirring of her own breath. Then right upon what cannot be destroyed, right upon the heart. Her pulse quickened, and she felt it, that same divine fire she had carried since the tomb, spreading once more through her body like light through crystal. She pressed her hand over her heart and whispered, "Then let my heart be your scroll, and every beat a word of your remembrance." The ruins seemed to awaken. The air shimmered faintly, and the carvings upon the stone glowed for the briefest moment, as if the temple itself remembered its purpose. She rose and walked out into the night. The stars followed her, silent witnesses of her vow. And in that silence, something holy stirred. The wind carried her heartbeat down into the valleys below, and those who slept there dreamed of light, and still the heavens waited. The dawn came softly, folding gold into the ruins where she had prayed. Mist curled between the stones like incense from an unseen altar. Mary stood upon the threshold, her face turned toward the east, where the horizon burned with the quiet fire of awakening. The teacher's words lived within her now, not echoes, but heartbeat. Every breath she drew seemed to summon his presence, not beside her, but through her. There was no longer he and I, only the stillness that remembered them both. She walked again, following no path. Her feet found the roads as rivers find the sea. Villages passed like fleeting shadows. Some welcomed her, others turned away. But she carried no anger, for she understood what the cave had taught her. That light must often pass unseen through those who fear its gentleness. One evening, she stopped beside a field of ripening grain. The wind swayed through it in waves, each motion like a breath of prayer. She sat among the stalks, her fingers brushing their golden heads, and whispered, "So this is what it means to remember to let what dies feed what will live." And still the heavens waited. As the sun descended, the world filled with a deep and sacred quiet. From that silence, she felt a stirring, a warmth rising from the earth, as though the ground itself spoke in light. Her eyes filled with tears. She saw them again, not angels, not visions, but souls like sparks adrift in the dark. Some wept, some shone, some reached for her. And the voice came, soft as a sigh. Every heart that loves becomes a scripture, every act of mercy, a line upon the eternal scroll. She placed her hand upon the soil, feeling its pulse, its living rhythm. "Then the world is your book," she whispered, "and we, the words still being written." The wind rose, carrying her voice across the fields. And in its passing, the grain seemed to bow, as though all creation had heard and answered, "Amen." The last light of day fell upon her face. She smiled, calm, eternal, for she knew the story was no longer hers. It belonged to the generations that would come after, to the hearts that would awaken in darkness and remember this flame. And in that silence, something holy stirred. The stars appeared one by one, each a word upon the infinite page of heaven, and still the heavens waited. The road led her north, toward the sea that once carried the prophets. It was vast and mournful, an endless mirror of sky and sorrow. The wind there tasted of memory, and every wave that broke upon the shore seemed to whisper a forgotten name. Mary stood at its edge, her cloak heavy with dust and years. The horizon shimmered, endless, unpromising, and yet she smiled, for she had walked through the silence of God, and found that it was not absence, but breath too deep for sound. The sea called her closer. She stepped until the water touched her feet, cool, alive, remembering. The tide pulled softly at her robe, and for a moment she saw herself reflected there, not as the woman who once wept at a tomb, but as the light that now carried his remembrance through the ages. And still, the heavens waited. She knelt at the water's edge and wept, not for grief, but for the beauty of what could not be kept. Her tears fell into the sea, and the waves accepted them as offering. Each tear shimmered, turning to salt that caught the light like tiny stars before dissolving into the deep. And she knew this was how heaven wrote its memories, not on paper, not in stone, but in water and salt and time. Her sorrow had become part of the earth's breath, a gospel the sea would carry to distant shores long after her name was forgotten. The wind rose. She heard again his voice within it, gentle, unhurried, infinite. Do not seek to be remembered, Mary. Seek only to remember, for remembrance is the life that never dies. She closed her eyes. The waves moved around her like a great heartbeat, and in that rhythm she felt the whole of creation, the sorrow, the joy, the endless returning. When she stood again, her cheeks were streaked with salt, and her eyes shone like the sea itself. The tears had not vanished. They had become part of the water, part of the sacred tide that would one day reach every shore, whispering the same truth she now carried in her soul, that love, once offered, is never lost. And in that silence, something holy stirred. The horizon flickered, as though eternity had bent low to kiss the earth. And still, the heavens waited. Night descended upon the sea, slow and deliberate. The water turned from silver to onyx, its surface rippling with faint reflections of the stars, each one a prayer cast upon the face of the deep. Mary remained where she was, her feet half buried in the wet sand, the waves reaching and retreating, as though even the sea itself wished to understand her silence. The tears had stopped, but the salt of them lingered on her lips. It was the taste of remembrance, bitter, pure, eternal. She lifted her gaze toward the horizon. It seemed to breathe. Somewhere beyond that line of darkness was the world she once knew. Men building temples, arguing over names, writing laws to contain what cannot be contained. And here, before the great expanse, she knew how small that world truly was. And still, the heavens waited. She spoke softly to the sea, to the wind, to the unseen. Is this what it means to love you, to lose everything until only you remain? The water shimmered in answer, and the tide rose higher, wrapping her ankles, her knees, her hands. It felt not cold, but alive, as though the sea itself remembered the one who once commanded it to be still. She closed her eyes and let the waves pull at her, feeling the pulse of the tide move through her veins. The wind carried her hair around her face like a veil. Her voice trembled. If my tears are to become salt, then let them sweeten the waters of the world. Let every sorrow I have carried become a balm for those who will come after. The waves calmed, their rhythm slowing until the world seemed to breathe with her. A hush fell, vast, reverent, endless, and within it she felt again the presence, not apart, not above, but within the motion of the sea, within the stillness of her own heart. Your tears, the voice whispered, are my covenant with the earth. Through them I shall remember mankind. Her breath caught, for in that instant she understood heaven weeps through the hearts of those who love deeply, and every tear that falls in faith becomes a seed of divine remembrance. The tide retreated, the stars glowed brighter. Mary knelt upon the sand, her palms pressed into the cool earth. She whispered, "Then let my sorrow be sanctified. Let my salt heal the wound of the world." And in that silence, something holy stirred. The wind sighed against the water's edge, and it seemed the sea itself was praying. And still, the heavens waited. Morning returned pale, weightless, holy. The tide had drawn back, leaving the sand smooth and glistening as polished glass. Mary stood where the water once kissed her feet, and though the sea had retreated, its pulse still echoed within her steady, sacred, infinite. She gazed toward the horizon. A faint mist drifted upon the water like the breath of angels, and for the first time she felt no longing, no ache, no wound. Her tears had not emptied her, they had completed her. Every sorrow she had carried had become light, every grief a doorway, every silence a prayer. And still the heavens waited. She turned away from the sea and began to walk inland. The air smelled of salt and myrrh. The world seemed quieter now, as though the earth itself had been washed clean by her weeping. Each step left no mark upon the sand, only a faint shimmer like starlight pressed into dust. She remembered his words, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." But comfort, she now knew, was not the ending of sorrow, it was the sanctification of it. For every tear shed in love returns to the Creator as worship. At midday she came upon a widow, drawing water from a well. The woman was weary, her face marked by the years. Mary greeted her softly and asked for a drink. When the woman looked into her eyes, she froze, for within them shimmered something otherworldly, a calm that knew the shape of eternity. Mary smiled and lifted the jug for her. "Your tears," she said, "are seen. Do not hide them. They are the salt that keeps the world alive." The woman wept, though she did not know why. The water spilled between them, shining like quicksilver in the dust. And Mary thought perhaps that was all the gospel needed to be. A tear turned to light, shared between souls who still believed. When she left, the air was filled with fragrance, not perfume, but the scent of something holy, the mingling of earth and heaven, where compassion had touched the ground. And in that silence, something holy stirred. The waves behind her sighed. The world seemed to breathe, and somewhere in the unseen, a tear fell from heaven into the sea, and it too became salt. And still, the heavens waited. The days after the sea felt weightless, as if she walked through a world newly washed by grace. The sky carried a strange clarity, a kind of brightness that did not burn, but revealed. Mary wandered along the coast, her bare feet marking soft paths that the tide would soon erase. She felt no need to hurry. The journey itself had become her prayer. Every horizon opened like a page of scripture, and every gust of wind turned it for her. Sometimes, when the dusk deepened, she would stop and face the sea again. Its voice was steady now, neither storm nor calm, but a great breathing that spoke of endurance. She whispered, "Do you still remember me?" And from across the waters came the faintest shimmer of reply, "Always." And still the heavens waited. At the edge of the shore, she built a small cairn of stones, not as monument, but as remembrance. Each stone she lifted bore a word not written, but felt: love, sorrow, mercy, light. When the last was placed, the wind moved through it and made a low, resonant hum, like a voice hidden within the earth. She smiled. Her tears had long dried, but their salt lived on in the sea breeze, in the sweat of the earth, in the taste of every prayer that rose upward from mortal hearts. She understood then that all tears were gathered, none forgotten, none wasted. They were the waters of the covenant, the river of compassion that flowed between heaven and earth. As night returned, the stars emerged over the sea, their light trembling upon the waves like silver ink across black parchment. She sat beside her stones and whispered, "If one heart, even one, learns to forgive because of what I have wept, then let these tears be the offering that binds the worlds." And in that silence, something holy stirred. The wind grew gentle. The tide whispered against her feet once more. Somewhere beyond the horizon, a dawn not yet born was gathering its light. Mary closed her eyes and rested her hand upon her heart, feeling the salt of the sea still there, the covenant written in her very breath. And still, the heavens waited. The sea no longer frightened her. Its voice, once thunder and mourning, had become the low song of remembrance, a language she now understood. Each wave that touched the shore seemed to whisper, "You are not gone, you are becoming." Mary stood upon a cliff where wind and water met. the horizon wide and silver beneath a sky the color of forgiveness. Her hair moved in the wind like smoke from sacred fire. The salt of her tears still marked her skin, and the scent of the sea clung to her robe, a baptism, not of water, but of time. Below her, the stones glimmered where the tide withdrew. They were smooth, unbroken, shaped by centuries of surrender. And she thought perhaps this is what faith is, to let the waves strike again and again until the soul becomes polished enough to reflect heaven. And still, the heavens waited. She descended the path, each step slow, deliberate, the sound of her sandals mingling with the sea's eternal breathing. At the base of the cliff, she found a single stone, round and pale as the moon. When she touched it, warmth spread through her palm, not heat, but life. The stone pulsed faintly, as though it too remembered the word that once spoke the world into being. She sat beside it, the sea whispering to her right, the sky open to her left. And there, between water and firm ground, she felt the meeting of two covenants, the restless and the steadfast, motion and stillness, heaven and earth. She lifted the stone and pressed it to her heart. "If I must leave no scripture," she said softly, "then let this be mine, a prayer written in salt and silence." The wind carried her words away, and the stone seemed to hum in answer. It was not magic, nor miracle, but recognition matter remembering its maker through her. And in that moment she understood. The sea was the breath of God, and the stone was his heartbeat, and she was the silence between them. The tide rose, kissing the hem of her garment. She placed the stone upon the shore, and as the water touched it, light shimmered briefly faint, golden, eternal. And in that silence, something holy stirred. The sea exhaled. The stone shone once, then stilled, and still the heavens waited. The morning after the shimmer, the tide lay calm and pale, its surface smooth as a mirror of the unseen. Mary rose from her resting place among the dunes. The light touched her face and lingered there, as if the dawn itself recognized her. She went again to the stone she had left upon the sand. It remained where she had placed it, half buried, half shining, as though undecided whether to belong to sea or shore. Around it, the water had carved a small hollow, and within that hollow, tiny shells and grains of crystal light had gathered. It looked to her like an altar built by the hands of angels, too humble to be seen. She knelt before it. Her fingers traced the smooth curve of the stone, and the air grew still. She felt its quiet strength, its memory of being shaped and reshaped by centuries of waves. It had endured. It had become what surrender makes of all things holy through patience. And still, the heavens waited. She closed her eyes and spoke to the stone as to a friend. "You have known his voice longer than I. You have felt his tide more faithfully than man's prayer. Teach me how to remain." The sea answered first. A single wave reached forward and touched the hem of her robe, then drew back, leaving the sound of retreat that felt like a heartbeat. She understood. To remain was not to stay still, but to yield again and again to the rhythm of the divine breath. Her tears returned, yet they were gentle now, tears of gratitude, of recognition. They fell upon the stone and sparkled there, and in that shimmer she saw reflected not her face, but a vast horizon of light. The wind rose. Her voice broke softly through the noise of it. "If I am to be remembered, let it be as a stone that the sea does not conquer, but sanctifies." And in that silence, something holy stirred. The sea glowed faintly, and the stone shone like a small moon in her palm. Far beyond, the first star of evening flickered awake, and the light between heaven and earth folded into stillness. And still, the heavens waited. The wind grew heavy that night. It swept across the shore in long, low sighs, as if the whole world were dreaming of what it once was. Mary built a small fire among the rocks, its flame bending to the breath of the sea. She sat close to it, the warmth kissing her hands, her gaze lost between the darkness of the water and the darkness of the sky. The stone lay beside her. Even in the firelight, it shimmered faintly with its own glow, a soft pulse, quiet, alive. She touched it, and in its warmth she felt something vast, a memory that was not hers, a voice that was not heard but known. Before the waters covered the earth, the voice said within her, I was the foundation. Before the light broke the firmament, I waited beneath the sea. Her breath caught. It was not imagination, it was remembrance. Creation itself was speaking through the stone. It remembered what man had forgotten, that all things once sang together before time learned to divide them. And still the heavens waited. The sea answered the voice in rhythm, its waves rolling with quiet reverence. Fire, water, stone, wind all bowed to the same silence. And Mary, sitting among them, realized she was no longer apart from creation. She was its remembering. Her tears came again, not of sorrow this time, but of awe. They hissed softly as they fell into the fire, turning to steam that rose and vanished into the stars. And she whispered through the smoke, if the sea is your breath and the stone your body, then let me be your echo. The tide reached higher, touching her feet, and in that moment she felt the sea and the stone answer her prayer, not with words, but with light. The glow spread outward, slow and golden, as though the very edges of the world were being rewritten. And in that silence, something holy stirred. The fire dimmed, the waves stilled, and all of heaven seemed to listen. And still, the heavens waited. When the morning came, the world was hushed, as though it had just been born. Mist rose from the sea, soft and silver, veiling the horizon. Mary sat upon the sand, her cloak damp with dew, the stone resting in her lap. It no longer glowed, yet its stillness was full of light. The fire had long gone out, but its warmth remained in the air, woven into the quiet rhythm of the waves. She turned the stone slowly in her hands. Its surface was smooth and pale, but as the sun climbed, faint lines began to appear, not carvings, not symbols, but patterns like veins of light running through its heart. They moved when she breathed. It was as though her own pulse had written itself into the stone, and still the heavens waited. She realized then that this was the mystery of all creation, that heaven's breath leaves traces upon everything that endures. The sea remembers, the stone remembers, even sorrow remembers, though time tries to wash it clean. Her voice was quiet, barely sound at all. Let this be my final gospel, not written in ink, but in silence, in tide, in stone. The wind moved around her, gentle, fragrant with salt and sunlight. Far below, the waves reached upward again, and for a moment she thought she saw a face within them, the reflection of the one who had called her name so long ago. But it did not vanish this time. It lingered, smiling through the water's shimmer, not above her, but within her, her eyes filled with light. She pressed the stone to her heart once more and whispered, I remember. And in that silence, something holy stirred. The sea exhaled, the tide withdrew, and the world seemed to sigh in peace. She placed the stone back upon the sand, and where it touched, the earth glowed faintly, a single breath of gold, like dawn resting upon eternity. And still the heavens waited. Night fell again, but it was not darkness that came. It was depth. The sky unfolded like a vast ocean above her, each star a wave of light breaking upon the edges of time. Mary lay upon the sand, her hands folded upon her chest, listening to the slow breathing of the sea. The stone rested beside her, still warm from the day's Sunday. The world was quiet, but not silent. It was as though creation itself was waiting to speak, to reveal what it had held since the beginning, that the divine does not hide above, but reflects within. And still, the heavens waited. She turned her gaze upward. The stars trembled. For the first time, she did not see a sky beyond her reach. She saw a reflection, a great mirror, alive, remembering her gaze. Light looked upon light. Heaven looked upon itself through her. Her breath slowed. Her heart kept rhythm with the tide. And then, as softly as a dream rising through sleep, she heard it, a sound that was not sound, the language of light returning to its source. The kingdom was never above you, it whispered. It was always within your seeing. Her eyes filled with tears that did not fall. She felt her soul open like dawn breaking over water, and within that stillness she saw everything: the garden, the tomb, the mountain, the sea, each a doorway to the same truth, that the divine had always been looking through her eyes. She reached toward the heavens, her fingers brushed the air, and it shimmered like glass touched by flame. In its reflection, she saw not a woman aged by exile, but light in human form, the remembrance of what humanity was before forgetting. And in that silence, something holy stirred. The stars bent closer, and for an instant she saw them as eyes not watching, but weeping, their tears falling as light upon the waves. She whispered to them, "If I am your reflection, then let me shine as you shine, quietly, endlessly, without fear." The sea answered with a single rising wave, silver beneath the moon. It kissed her feet, then withdrew, carrying her reflection with it, and still the heavens waited. Dawn came slow, like a revelation that did not wish to startle. The light spread across the sea, thin as silk at first, then golden, then white, until the sky itself became a mirror of fire. Mary rose from the sand, her eyes half closed against the brilliance. The reflection of heaven moved across the water, and she stood within it, a shadow wrapped in radiance. The air trembled. It was as if the veil between worlds had thinned, and for the first time the earth could see itself as heaven did. The wind brushed her hair across her face, and in its motion she heard his voice again, not speaking from afar, but through her very breath. "You were never outside the light, Mary. It has been seeing itself through you." Her heart shuddered with wonder. She looked down at the water, and there she saw not her reflection alone, but the faces of all she had loved, the disciples, the poor, the lost, the teacher. Their eyes shone as hers did, each bearing the same flame, each part of the same remembering. And still the heavens waited. She knelt at the edge of the tide, and the sea stilled as though listening. "Then this is the truth," she whispered, "that every soul is a mirror of heaven, and every sorrow a place where light may enter." The words hung in the air like perfume. Her reflection rippled, and for an instant she saw the face of the teacher looking back, smiling, not as master, but as equal, as one light greeting another. She bowed her head, and when she lifted it again, the reflection had become her own once more. But she no longer felt the boundary between them. She knew now that divinity was not distance, but recognition, the moment the soul remembers its source. A stillness deeper than silence filled her. The sea breathed once more, and the wind circled her like a halo of invisible wings. And in that silence, something holy stirred. The light on the water folded itself into her eyes. She saw heaven not above, but within every shimmer of the tide. And still, the heavens waited. By midday, the air had turned to glass, so still, so clear, that sound itself seemed to kneel. Mary sat upon a flat stone, overlooking the tide pools, the same stone where the sea had once glowed beneath her touch. Around her, everything shimmered with quiet purpose. The rippling water, the drifting clouds, even the smallest grain of sand reflected the sun like a hidden star. She breathed slowly, feeling her heart echo the rhythm of the waves. The stillness was not absence, it was presence, awake and endless. And in that vast quiet, she began to see more clearly than sight allows. When she looked into the pools, the sky reflected there did not mirror the world above her. It was brighter, wider, deeper, a sky alive with movement, as if another heaven rested just beneath the surface of this one. She leaned closer. The light rippled, and in it she saw countless faces, some familiar, some yet unborn, each radiant, each carrying the same divine spark. "So this," she whispered, "is the kingdom, 1,000 reflections, each one a window for the same light." And still the heavens waited. The wind came then not harsh, but tender. It brushed her cheek as if in benediction. She remembered the teacher's eyes that morning in the garden, how they had held both sorrow and joy, the sorrow of what must end, and the joy of what could never die. "Was this what you meant?" she asked the silence, "that heaven is not beyond us, but within our remembering?" The tide moved in answer, washing over her feet and the stone, cool and alive, humming softly like a hymn made of breath. Her reflection wavered again, and she saw not the woman of her years, but the light she had become, a living flame mirrored upon the sea. Her tears came unbidden, but they did not fall from grief. They were the overflow of recognition, the sweet ache of the soul seeing itself at last. The sun sank lower, and its light lay upon the water like a golden veil. For a moment it seemed that the entire world bowed beneath it, sea, sky, heart, heaven, each reflecting the other in one unbroken circle of remembrance. And in that silence, something holy stirred. The wind stilled, the horizon glowed, and the sea, now motionless, became the mirror of heaven itself. And still the heavens waited. The evening descended like a closing eyelid, slow, peaceful, knowing. The sky blushed once, then deepened into indigo, and the first star rose from the horizon like a promise returning to its vow. Mary stood at the water's edge again. The tide brushed her feet, cool and familiar, and the mirror of heaven stretched before her, infinite, trembling, alive. She could feel the world breathing with her. The sea, the wind, even the stones beneath her sandals, each pulsing with the same rhythm, the same ancient heartbeat that began before creation, had a name. The air shimmered faintly, and for an instant the division between sky and water vanished. There was no above or below, no reflection or source, only light, only remembrance, and still the heavens waited. She looked into the sea, and this time her reflection did not look back as her own. It was luminous, radiant, neither woman nor vision, but something in between, the divine memory of what she had always been. The light within the reflection spoke not aloud, but through her. The mirror of heaven is not glass nor water, Mary. It is the soul that remembers its origin. Her breath trembled. She knelt, the waves rising to her hands. The sea cradled her palms like the hands of God. She whispered, "Then let me remain this reflection, not to be seen, but to remind." Her tears fell once more, but this time they did not vanish into salt. They glowed upon the surface of the water, each one a tiny star returning home. She watched as they drifted outward, dozens, then hundreds, until the sea itself became a sky. The wind hushed. The world held its breath, and heaven leaned close enough to see itself within her. And in that silence, something holy stirred. The stars above and the stars below met in one single shimmer, and for a heartbeat that felt eternal, there was no difference between heaven and earth, only love reflected endlessly through light. And still, the heavens waited. The world had grown quiet around her. The days passed, not as hours, but as breaths, each one a soft return to the silence she had carried since the garden. The sea no longer called her name. It simply sang, and in that song she heard all beginnings and endings braided together. She had traveled far from the roads of men, and yet she was closer to them than ever, for she had become the echo they did not know. They followed the unseen memory within their prayers, the whisper that rose between their words, and still the heavens waited. There were no scrolls in her hands now, no temple walls to hold her faith. But in her chest, the forgotten gospel lived, the word unspoken, the revelation unrecorded, the truth too simple for kingdoms to bear, that the divine does not dwell in power, but in compassion remembered by the heart. At dusk she sat beneath a solitary tree. Its roots curled through the earth like veins of light, and its branches touched the wind with gentleness. She leaned her head against the trunk and whispered, "Did they remember, Lord? Did the world keep your name?" The answer came not in words, but in warmth, a slow spreading through her body, a peace vast enough to cradle every sorrow. "They will forget," the voice murmured within her, And then they will remember again, for love cannot die, only sleep. Her eyes filled with tears, but they did not fall. She smiled through the stillness, the smile of one who has seen both grief and glory and found them to be the same light in different forms. The wind shifted. The air grew heavy with the fragrance of myrrh. She lifted her face, and in the fading gold of the sky, she saw his reflection once more, not as man, not as vision, but as light, greeting its own reflection. "Then let my name be lost," she whispered. "Let only the remembrance remain." And in that silence, something holy stirred. The leaves trembled, the sea sighed in the distance, and from somewhere beyond time, the forgotten gospel began to breathe again, not upon parchment, but within every heart that still dares to love. And still the heavens waited. Night gathered softly around the tree. Its branches reached toward the stars, like fingers yearning for reunion. Mary sat beneath it, her hands folded over her heart, her eyes reflecting the faint shimmer of heaven's lamps above. The world had grown smaller, quieter, closer. The pulse of the earth beat slow beneath her palms, a rhythm older than sorrow, older even than time. She had walked every road of grief and grace. She had seen kingdoms rise in dust and dreams built upon stone. And yet the only kingdom that endured was the one that remembered love. And still, the heavens waited. In the hush of that night, she began to hum a melody without language. It rose like smoke from her breath, twisting upward until even the stars seemed to lean closer to listen. It was not song, not prayer, but remembrance, the echo of a truth the world had buried beneath power and fear. She sang of light that lives in darkness, of tears that cleanse creation, of forgiveness that asks for nothing but to be given. The sound carried through the branches, and the tree seemed to tremble its leaves, whispering in 1,000 voices, each one murmuring the same name, beloved. The voice within her answered, "This is the gospel that cannot be erased, that love outlives its silence." Her eyes closed. The music flowed through her until there was no boundary left, no self, no sky, no sea, only the single breath of the divine remembering itself through her. She whispered, barely audible, "Then I am not lost. I am written where words cannot fade." The stars above shimmered brighter, and she felt their light pour into her, not to claim her, but to complete her. And in that silence, something holy stirred. The night bowed low, the wind circled her like a blessing, and the forgotten gospel, hidden for centuries in the folds of silence, rose again alive in breath, alive in mercy, alive in her stillness. And still, the heavens waited. The next morning arrived without sound. The sun did not rise, it unveiled itself, a slow blossoming of gold that seemed to come not from the horizon, but from within the air itself. The tree above her glowed faintly in the light, and its leaves shimmered like pages turning in a book no hand had ever written. Mary opened her eyes. The weight of years had left her, and what remained was only light. She breathed in the warmth, and it filled her lungs with a peace she had never known, a peace that was not the end of struggle, but the fulfillment of every sorrow she had ever carried. The earth beneath her felt alive, a heartbeat rising through roots, soil, stone. She could feel the memory of every tear that had ever fallen, and how each had become something sacred in return. She whispered, "This is the gospel, isn't it? Not in ink or tongue, but in the quiet of the soul that refuses to stop loving." And still, the heavens waited. She looked toward the sea once more. It glimmered like liquid glass beneath the sky, and for a moment she could not tell where one ended and the other began. There was no separation now, no heaven, no earth, only remembrance. The voice came to her again, fainter now, not because it was leaving, but because it was everywhere. "When you are gone, the wind will carry what you have seen. Your name will fade, but your silence will remain. Through that silence, I will speak." Her eyes filled, not with tears, but with light. The world around her seemed to hold its breath. The grass bent, the air shimmered, and every living thing grew still, as though all creation recognized what was unfolding. She placed her hand over her heart, beneath her palm, her pulse beat softly, steady, sure, infinite. She whispered, "Then let me be remembered not by what I said, but by what I kept sacred." And in that silence, something holy stirred. The tree above her bowed, the wind kissed her hair, and the light, gathering its courage, wrapped around her like dawn, embracing its own reflection. And still, the heavens waited. The last light of day descended slow, falling across the fields in soft ribbons of gold. The tree at her back hummed faintly in the breeze, its roots deep in earth, its crown brushing heaven. Mary sat at its base, her hands resting open upon her knees, palms facing the sky, as though still expecting the rain of revelation. The sea was far now, but she could still hear it, a heartbeat at the edge of memory, steady and patient, calling her home. The air smelled of cedar and salt. Somewhere in the distance, a dove called once, its note long, mournful, and pure. She closed her eyes. Her breath slowed until it was almost indistinguishable from the wind. She felt the weight of her body soften, the borders of her being loosening into light. It was not death she felt drawing near, it was return. "All things that remember," the voice whispered, "come back to me." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. She could see them, the disciples, the women who had wept beside her, the faces of the poor, the broken, the faithful. She could see the generations still to come, their hearts like unopened scrolls waiting to be read. She whispered, "Let them remember only that love was real." The air shimmered. A light, white as dawn and gentle as breath, began to rise from the ground around her. It was not fire, yet it glowed, not music, yet it sang. It flowed through her hair, her hands, her very heartbeat, a crown of stillness woven by heaven itself. And still the heavens waited. The final word she spoke was not heard by any ear, but every stone and leaf remembered it. "I am home." Her form grew faint, as if the world itself were exhaling her. Where she sat, the grass bowed low, and the tree's shadow turned to gold. The light lingered for a moment longer, a soft, shimmering imprint of a soul, transfigured by remembrance, then dissolved into the air, into the wind, into the very breath of creation. And in that silence, something holy stirred. The sea, the wind, the stars all moved once, as though acknowledging her return. And when the world stilled again, it was brighter, as if her presence had never truly left. And still, the heavens waited. The floodwaters receded, but the silence did not. And still, beneath the stone, the light remembers. If the last word of heaven was carved in dust, would we still call it divine? The wind is quiet now. The sea has gone still, and the stars have returned to their watch. Yet the air carries her breath, that last, unbroken whisper of the woman who remembered. She was never erased, only hidden like a seed beneath the soil of forgetting, waiting for the right silence to bloom again. And tonight she blooms in you, in the part of you that still kneels before wonder, in the part of you that still believes sorrow can turn holy. The heavens have ceased to speak, but their silence is not absence. It is listening for your heartbeat, for your remembering, for the small light that flickers within your chest and dares to echo the dawn. So breathe now. Let the ancient wind move through you. Let the salt of your tears become your prayer. For every tear is scripture, every heartbeat a psalm, every breath a fragment of the gospel forgotten by time. May you walk gently, carrying the memory she carried, that love does not end in the tomb, that divinity is not found in thrones, but in the tenderness that refuses to die. And if, one night, the sky grows too silent and you fear heaven has turned away, listen for her voice within the quiet. It will sound like your own, and in that silence, something holy will stir. The light will return, the remembrance will live again. For love cannot be buried, it only waits to be remembered.